Good evening and welcome to the Dryden Theater at the George Eastman Museum. I'm Phil Taylor. I'm an associate curator in the Department of Photography here at the Eastman Museum. It's my great pleasure to introduce Joy Episalla to the Dryden Theater as part of the Spring 2025 program of our long-running Wish You Were Here lecture series. Wish You Were Here is generously supported by Tom Tischer, PhD, and we are very grateful to Tom for your support of this long-running program. This is the second event in this year's series following on a lecture by Lola Flash back in the end of March, and it will be followed next week on May 7th with a lecture by Lindsay McIntyre, whose work is currently screening in our multi-purpose hall. And that event will take place at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, May 7th, so we hope that you can join us for that event as well. It's my great pleasure, as I said, to introduce Joy Episalla. We will be doing tonight's event maybe somewhat differently than some of our standard formats in that we have the great pleasure of screening their film as long as there's you, as long as there's me, which dates to 2023, but is really the end result of a 20-year project of working with footage and editing and recombining and sort of resolving a project that has now been screened at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris and received its North American premiere on Monday at the Museum of Modern Art to a sold-out audience. Very excited to screen this film here at the Dryden Theater. It's 35 minutes long and will be followed by an on-stage conversation between Joy and myself, and we'll open it up for questions after that as well. Joy Episalla studied art and received degrees from RIT and the California College of the Arts. Got some feedback from a different mic there, but hopefully that'll resolve itself. In addition to having work in the collections of museums such as the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Rose Museum of Art at Brandeis University, Centre Pompidou in Paris, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, Joy has presented solo exhibitions and projects at institutions including the Phoenix Art Museum, Visual Studies Workshop here in Rochester, the International Center for Photography in New York, the Chazen Museum of Art at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Participant Inc. in New York. But in some sense, this emphasis on solo exhibitions is in part misleading because collective activities have so long been a part of her practice. And in particular, I want to highlight their activities with Fierce Pussy, which formed in 1991 as a queer art collective with core members Nancy Brooks Brody, Zoe Leonard, Carrie Yamaoka, and Joy Episalla. And this is a really interesting moment, exciting moment, I think, for Fierce Pussy and those four core members. Their work is included in an exhibition at Participant Inc. in New York that is Chapter 8 of a long-running exhibition project, although I think that concept doesn't quite encompass all that it is, that is organized by the curator Joey Tang. And that exhibition, titled Arms Ache Avid Aeon, Nancy Brooks Brody, Joy Episalla, Zoe Leonard, Carrie Yamaoka, Fierce Pussy Amplified, is now in its 8th chapter, following 4 chapters at the Beeler Gallery in Columbus, Ohio, a 5th chapter at the Institute for Contemporary Art Philadelphia, a forthcoming book publication that I believe is chapter 6, if my accounting is correct. I'm getting the affirmation. A 7th chapter at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris last year, and now chapter 8 coming home, in a sense, to New York City. And this is an ongoing, essentially a dialogue between the 5 artists as individuals and as a collective, along with a 6th, a curator, about what it means to make work together and alongside one another, and how that unfolding practice over really 3 decades, 35 years almost now, can be represented through work that in one dimension is activist in its orientation, and in others is deeply devoted to explorations of form through sort of recursive, rigorous studies of the possibilities of different media. And it's if one has time to be in New York City between now and May 11th, I highly recommend this exhibition, although I understand there will be future chapters and opportunities to see it as well. So this is, I think, a wonderful moment to be celebrating the work of Joy Episalla And I thank you all for being here. As I said, we're going to begin with the film screening, and then we'll resume our conversation afterwards. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, and thank you to everyone in the audience who is here as well. We've just had the opportunity to watch your remarkable, I would describe it as an experimental essay film, but it's also an archive of quite a variety of performances, animal, human, non-human, material, the weather, that have been collaged together from material filmed mostly handheld in a variety of formats on a variety of cameras, and that you've brought together through quite a range of editing and post-production strategies. But I want to stick with the film for a moment to sort of think about what's at stake in this project and in this moment, and then bring that into dialogue with some of your other work over the past 30 odd years that are in there. And I particularly wanted to start with this notion of what you call non-performance performance, and thinking through that register that you've identified as a subject, and that the film brings together as a series of notations in close relationship to travel and the travelogue, and more expansively a notion of movement that is articulated through, planes, trains, automobiles, and a variety of other vehicular motions.
Wings.
Yeah, exactly. But can we stick for a moment with this notion of non-performance performance? And I'd love to hear you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that and what feels significant about it.
Okay. Well, first off, hi. And thanks to you, Phil, and the Eastman Museum, and Tom. Am I going to say your last name correctly? Tish?
Thomas Tischer.
Tom
Thank you,
Tischer. Sorry. Hi. Thanks for making this possible. It's really, for me, great to get to see the film on a big screen. You get to see a lot more of what's going on in it and the complexity of it. I was thinking about non-performance performance in the sense that these are all moments that I have filmed over, it's kind of like an 18-year period. I constantly photograph and record all the time, whether I'm in the car or flying in a plane or just wherever I am. Maybe it's almost like a nervous tick in a sense, but it's also allowed me to set up a very large archive of footage that, for the way that I work, I get to think about things over a certain period of time, and certain things really stick with me. And then I start to see how they might play with each other and become a thread that falls in on itself and folds in on itself. And what I was aware of, though, in a lot of the moments in the film, is that I was the person capturing that, or recording that, but there was no audience. It was a performance for the one person that happened to catch it in that, and that was me, luckily. But for that person who was performing, it was for them maybe something else, whether it be rehearsal, or maybe it was just how they were feeling in that moment, or something that they needed to do. And as I started to think about how these things work together, I realized that these non-performances, once they became part of the film and then were shown to a viewer, the viewer then became the audience for now the performance. So again, it's this idea of folding back in on itself. So that's sort of where I was thinking about.
And it seems like there is a particular ethos or ethics then to how you're thinking about, what you described as these different registers of performance, the rehearsal space, the dance that is done purely for the joy of dancing, the sort of small quotidian activities that may structure a day or just happen and happen to be observed, and that ethics of relationship to material but also subject matter feels like something that is operative across your work in a variety of media at this point.
I'd also say that there's obviously no, for me, I was really trying for no hierarchy. The birds are as important as the young girl singing. And so that even in the credits, as themselves, according, to their appearance, there's something really, for me, really nice in that, that we're all kind of playing in the same field. And what changes is the light, right? The luminosity of the moment. And so, yeah, that all of those things that I'm considering in the film are also, I also think of the film in a way as a sculpture, because I'm making decisions and I'm thinking about placement and direction, that has to do with not only a fluidity, but a sense of space. And so you have, whether it's the car window looking through the mirror at what's passing by, but you're also seeing what's ahead or behind you, whether it's the birds moving this way and that, the reflection in the young girl's sunglasses to whoever's sitting in front of her, the experience of you as the viewer being kind of a membrane in a sense of when you hear the little like spare narrative about the flood, right? And then, there's this moment of description of Jay walking into the front room and, seeing scales at the top of her lungs, except that you never hear that. What I'm hoping is that you make that appear in your head. And all those things for me are actionable. They're performative even for the audience. So anyway, I think I've used that into, yeah, my work in general.
But that, maybe if we want to advance the slide,
Yep.
because I think there is a series of really significant and interesting connections. You may need to point it at that. Let's see. There we go. Between your moving image work with a film like the one we just screened, and your work in other media, and in particular the foldtograms, one of which is currently on screen. Do you want to describe briefly
Sure.
what the foldtograms are?
So foldtograms, I'm using, so a very long time I photograph things that are very recognizable, and I was trying to push them into this sculptural arena. I've always tried to push photography and the moving image into this sculptural arena. And at a certain point, I decided that I didn't want to print images, but that the paper itself, the light coated, the light sensitive, emulsion coated paper was the object. And what could I get the object, the paper, to do? And so what you're looking at is color photographic paper, chromogenic paper, that in this case is about 40 feet long, 50 inches wide. And the white areas are the back of the paper, so what you usually don't see in a photograph. And the front is the emulsion side. That's light sensitive. But in this case, I'm using, in all of them, I'm using the photogram process, meaning I'm not using a camera, I'm not using negatives, but I am in some cases using the chemicals. I'm also using other things that you're not supposed to do to photographs. I'm ripping them and I'm folding them, and there's something very performative in that. And also, in this case, what's reading as, I think I have a pointer. Does that work? Yeah. Okay, cool. So what is reading is blue. This is the emulsion side, and I exposed this to daylight. And when you expose it to daylight, it turns towards blue. And the pink areas, I did this winter in the snow. So the water, the snow reacted with the emulsion, and it went pink. And I never fixed it. So it keeps changing. So the foldograms can take on many shapes, and depending on the site, they're site responsive, so they will change. So this foldogram will never look this way this again. It will change. And part of my idea is that through process, it's making itself through its process. It takes its history with it. Each fold or change from one iteration becomes the future of it. So it takes its history with it, but it makes something new. Fold to gram.
And so the works are actors or agents in that sense as well, it seems
Yes.
like.
Yeah.
But I'm also struck that as you've been working this manner for quite some time, you have now a very embodied sense of the capacities of these materials, what their propensities are to behave in certain ways. And I think as one of these connections, you've described the studio as a laboratory to me. But I think one of these connections, when I'm struck watching the film, is the extent of this expertise and embodied knowledge that is there in these performances, ranging from someone like a celebrated artist like Justin Vivian Bond to someone who, at least to you or I perhaps, is a stranger dancing with incredible virtuosity on the street. I mean, to a boombox, so to speak, in this public performance. But there are this incredible respect and care for the expertise and knowledge of performers in this work that seems to carry over in a abstract and processual way, a process-based way, to some of the things that then you're doing with the foldtograms and their capacity for iteration and transformation and mutability as a central feature of the work.
That's really good. I like that, Phil. Yeah. So when we were talking about having this conversation, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe it would be interesting pairing some of the foldograms with stills from the film. So this is that ferry section, and that shadow, what you're seeing, is the shadow of the people that were on the ferry, and that was the wake of the ferry. Um, and so, of course, the one on the, I guess I don't know what that is, right or left now, but you get it. So here's that same foldogram again, completely different iteration, and its ability to change. It's also, there's nothing holding this in place. It's all being held on its own tension against each other and the way in which it's sitting on itself.
When I recently ran into you at the gallery, which was one of these fortuitous encounters,
Yes.
I overheard you describe to someone that a photogram like this articulates something like queer space or a queer space. And I wonder if you might elaborate that in light of the broader set of practices and engagements that you've had over the years with Fierce Pussy and otherwise, and maybe just a sense of what queer space means to you with a work like this.
Well, I think first off, when you first see this, I don't know that you know what it is. And that's, I think, where I'm playing with the space. So no one knows anything about anyone else. You take things at face value, and hopefully we can all, live and let live. And so in that, in the celebration of that, maybe there's a way in which the foldograms don't. I don't think at first one, maybe when you come upon it, knows what that is, and it's taking a kind of space, but there's a subversiveness in that, and also a way of holding space, but the space that's being held can change, right? Because it gets to change when it moves into another space. So I think those are the ways in which I think I'm holding space, or allowing for a kind of way of taking space. Yeah, and in the work that I do with Fierce Pussy, collectively working with 3 other people for over 30-something years, there's a lot of trust that gets built up, and a lot of ways in which we exchange ideas and can work communally, right? And so the balance between one's private or your practice and then how you work with other people. But as much as those might seem separate, I feel like there's a lot of ways in which it's all happening at the same time. There's a net in that, a safety net, a, the kind of way that family then is brought in, and friendship and ideas.
And that's something that the exhibition at Participant Inc. really brings out, is that there are quite disparate works in many ways, but then sort of the exhibition, in terms of how it's been organized, brings out these affinities between your distinctive practices. And I think, this is another example in the way that you have staged this slideshow, where there are certain motifs or leitmotifs and themes that cut across the filmic work and the photographic work, your attraction to certain types of textures and tones. But also, yeah, exactly. I think this is a remarkable image as well.
So this was from chapter 7 at Palais de Tokyo, and this foldogram is 35 feet long by about 42 inches wide. It's RC paper, which I think is really ugly paper. I don't like the paper, but I think I've made it really beautiful, if I can say so myself. So what I'm doing here, and I think you'll see in one of the slides, so in this case, when I exposed it, I did expose this in the dark room. I wanted it, to be black. And then I heated it and I cracked the emulsion. So any white lines that you're seeing is actually the paper substrate coming up through the emulsion. And so this is like the 7th iteration of this foldogram. And what was remarkable about the space that Arms Ache, our chapter, had within this larger exhibition was that we had asked them to expose the skylights, which had a kind of metal cage, holding the glass, and it became like a sundial. And so if it was a sunny day, as the light traveled through the space, so did the shadows, which to me made total sense. I think there's a close-up. So now you're getting to see that this is the cracking of the emulsion. And it's been really worked, this paper, because RC has a polymer plastic coating, right? It allows for really manipulating it, really folding it and crunching it. And it really gives you, it almost feels like, it could almost be like elephant skin. I mean, it has a real texture to it. But there's a lot of, it's very strong. It will probably live all of us.
Yeah, there is a remarkable tension within these works between their sort of sense of structure and the forces that are holding them up, and also a sense that they might be fragile and vulnerable in that sense. And I wonder, with that in mind, do you think of them as akin to bodies, or is there some other sort of analogical relationship?
Well, I think akin to my own body, because I'm manipulating not only the roll, like this is a full roll of paper, right? So I'm manipulating that, like in the dark room, in processing, it's very physical. And then it becomes very physical, manipulating it to arrange it into whatever the shape is going to be depending on the situation that it's going to sit in. Yeah. So that would be a real body reference in that sense. And also the trace of the manipulation of the hand in that. The analog side of that too is
Right. They also become archives of their own experiences in some sense.
exactly.
And when you exhibit them in a new iteration on a sort of museological level, they receive another timestamp. Right?
Correct.
So on a wall label, you might see that it's a particular foldogram that has dates from 2018, 2021, 2022, 2024, 2027, and so on.
Because each of those becomes a catalog of not only it's the iterations that had become before, but also its history. So it's sort of a way of marking time, right? I thought this was an interesting pairing. Clearly, my eye went to those two women in the scene in the flamingo singers performing. I think at first I was just recording the flamenco, and then I started noticing that, wait a minute, there's like a whole nother play going on here behind. And I liked all that. I mean, I use that a lot in this way of, one thing is the thing you think you're focusing on, but actually the longer you look at something, you start to see something else, which is really interesting about watching the film again, because you start making connections between things and you see that there are these other ways in which you could look at something. The other comparison I would make here is that this photograph is actually of my aunt, Nettie, and her friend. And these were photographs that my grandmother gave me when I was 15. And I'd done a lot of work with them over the years. I think my grandmother knew something about me before I did, because I became, the receptor of these photographs and studied them. And I was looking at the moment of touch, or how these people related to each other, because I'd never met my aunt, and I'd never met this other woman who actually, she was my grandmother's maid of honor. And so I found little things out about their history. And I worked with them for a long time, and I did a lot of photographing and then rephotographing of these photographs, and then Xeroxing them or photocopying them. And so kind of looking at the moment of touch or intimacy. I was printing in black and white. They were on, I believe, fiber-based black and white paper. And then in this case, after photographing and rephotographing, I wanted the noise and the grain to be even more accentuated. And so, and then by Xeroxing and re-Xeroxing, I got all these tones. And then I started thinking about that memory was a little bit like film. And I started thinking about the fluttering of when, like, the sprocket breaks on the film and the image sort of slides, and you see just like those moments, and doing it in this way in which it was like a scroll and this puddle onto the floor. And what I thought was, and I did, these are back from, let's see, 1993, maybe. And so, did it go? Okay. I just thought it was interesting that, even the foldograms, there was this relationship between this sculptural way of looking at something. And there's a way in which I think you're always, ideas that you've had, they come forward again in some way. They start to show themselves again.
Well, it seems like as you've used photography in this mode as a way of articulating a certain type of relationship to space, one of the ways that you've attempted to undo binaries is to sort of bridge this relationship between the wall and the floor.
Correct.
And you see that in the cascades as well, that even that notion that the vertical and the horizontal are the two axes is something that the sculptural characteristics of the work sort of denies because of how they fold on themselves and how one side may come to the fore or recede into.
And then also plays into the two women in the background of the performance of the flamenco. And then I realized when I was putting this together that there was something also about their closeness that I think I was remembering something from before when I zoomed in on that, but not necessarily knowing it in the moment that I filmed it. So that I like all those kind of relationships too. Also think it's really interesting about these photographs that my grandmother gave me that I don't know who the photographer was, but it was someone who clearly the two of them felt very comfortable with. And there's an extended amount of photographs from this
Of the
one
two of them.
of the two of them, yeah, that are really quite interesting.
And accessing those types of archives is something that Fierce Pussy has done in much of the work that
Absolutely.
they have done through posters and wheat pasting and other sort of activist modes of distribution. And my understanding is a lot of the impetus of doing that collective work and some of the visual and broader social strategies of that come out of each of your involvement with ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power.
We were all in ACT UP together. We actually all knew each other before ACT UP. So this is like the late 80s and the early 90s. And, we were in the trenches with our, friends, lovers, going to demonstrations, figuring out how to do things, to push the government, to think about medication and trying to save people, and wasn't going too well. And it was quite a dark time and lost a lot of friends. And in the midst of this, we put a call out on the floor of ACT UP to any, lesbians, artists, whatever, to come to a meeting. And what we wanted to talk about was lesbian visibility in the beginning. And I think Fierce Pussy has gone on to kind of open that umbrella. It's basically now a queer collective where we're, really considering everybody in the mix. And anyway, in those early days, one of the first things that we did were these posters where we took back derogatory terms that lesbians were called, and it was I am a, and then a list of derogatory terms, and the last line was and proud. And so from there we got into our baby pictures, using our own baby pictures with a derogatory term underneath. And so there was this way in which we were already using, they weren't found photographs, but photographs that had been taken of us in our families. And also, so there's that kind of an archive I think, in the mix. And there was also this way of photographing and rephotographing or re-Xeroxing something. And again, about the noise, because it used to be when you Xerox, you get all this other texture in there. So that was in play. And I think those things also I was playing around with already in the darkroom. If you're using a negative and black and white, or well, color too, but the grain. So all those things, and I think all those textures have kind of gone into the foldtograms as well.
We're going to open it up to questions from the audience in just a little bit. With that in mind, welcome you to think of any questions you might have. But I wonder, Joy, if you want to keep advancing through this, and maybe
Sure.
if we move to the psychoanalysts and the market as a sort of coda of this portion, sure. Because I think it would be nice to begin and end the presentation with moving image work. And I think it's a piece, it's a 3-channel video installation that threads together a number of the things that we've been discussing in terms of observation, narration, the placement of the viewer, and in subtle ways, the sort of power and potential of forms of abstraction, I think, to attune us to different modes of perception and be tied to a broader concern for the political and the social.
Yep, I'm almost there. Yeah, so it's a 3-channel video. It was shot in Paris, and I wanted to find a market that I would be able to have an aerial view of. So, the markets in Paris, it's a open sidewalk, and then on a certain day they start to place the poles and they set up the market. And so I was looking for these things where it was very pedestrian, and something would get built and people would use it and then it would be taken down. And so there's already kind of a circular canon in that. And so this is a little clip from that. I went back into the living room to make a few notes about the things Monsieur G had told me. Monsieur appeared again from the bedroom, this time all shaved and suited up in pale gray, white shirt with a patterned tie of alternating small triangles of azure blue and forest green, and black leather loafers, and said, "How about lunch?" Monsieur said he'd pop down to the market after his 11 a.m. patient and buy choucroute, something I had to try, fresh, the best, only from this marché, what it was known for. I said I'd love to, while completely abdicating my quasi-vegetarianism on the spot, feeling it somehow impossible to admit that I rarely ate meat. Changing to tape number 6 and trying not to think about lunch and my porky fate, I looked down to see the now assembled small local market in full swing. People moved in and out, ducking under the blue and white tented stalls and meandering down the middle lane. I do love to shop, and I knew all kinds of items were available. Fresh fish, vegetables, fruit, baguette, all kinds of cheese, assorted meats, as well as tasty little tarts with spinach, brioche with sausage and pistachio, millefeuille of leeks and cheese, all ready to pop in the oven from the charcuterie. So I should probably just say that I shot this from these 2 psychoanalysts' apartment. I had done some other work with their complete books of Freud a couple years before, and I was looking for the spot, and I realized that through a mutual friend who was also a shrink, she said, well, the psychoanalysts, they have an apartment that overlooks that area where Place d'Arc is and the market. And they were very nice enough to let me use their apartment and the little terrace. And so I set my camera up there and I was like just putting the tapes in, like 90-minute tapes over this basically 24. Like I walked in their apartment at like 4 in the morning and I tried to be really quiet. So I taped this whole thing, and I hadn't totally decided what I was going to do with the footage. But the other thing that happened was I ended up having this whole, 24 hours with the 2 psychoanalysts where, in a way, I became their analyst and they became, it was like this crazy. And so I started to think about what the camera sees, the market, only from the certain viewpoint. Then the viewer becomes what you're sitting where you can see what the camera saw, and what you're hearing is from what happened in the apartment behind, basically behind the camera. And so that's what gets laid out. And the first the first video is the first afternoon. The second is from like 5 in the morning till like noon, and then the third is noon till when it gets taken down again, because I was trying to think of a way in which it would be nice to see all those time rates, but at the same time, it also reads visually like a drawing. There's a linearness in that way. So anyway, that's the setup.
And I think what you're describing in terms of the structural relationship of what's happening before the camera versus all the things that are happening after, that resonates for me with as long as there's you, as long as there's me, where there's
That's right.
this really porous boundaries of the performance that is observed in many cases, and something that seems marginal suddenly becomes a point of great attention, or worthy of attention, or some sort of action starts to take place, or someone that you thought was an observer begins clapping as part of the flamenco.
Correct.
And that this is articulating a really specific kind of social space that's being articulated through performance as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is like choreography, watching all these patterns. You're also seeing people enter, in this case, from all four directions, and you're looking down and above, so it kind of flattens it out into a drawing. Then you have all these, all the choreography of what's pedestrian, and that
But then
plays
also the
into
roof flies off at one
Yes.
point.
Yeah, right. Right.
There are
One of
these
the
chants.
Yes,
things.
a car gets towed. I mean, there's all kinds of things. There's all these little vignettes. And so when I started to make As Long as There's You, As Long as There's Me, I mean, obviously I was taking what I had learned from Le Psychanalyste Alain Marché, this piece, even in the way in which I titled people was Monsieur and Madame G. So in As Long as There's You, As Long as There's Me, it's T or C or B or, again, a way of allowing a kind of openness for anybody to have a relationship to that, as opposed to like naming something. That seemed really important as well.
There's somehow both particularity but anonymity within that.
Yeah, and I think that allows for how community works too. So I think that works back and forth.
I want to give others an opportunity. If you have questions for Joy, now is a great time. And Emma has a microphone here. If you just raise your hands. I see one Emma over here with the red.
I'm sorry. Could you talk about the installation of the photograms? Is it choreographed? Do you think of them as a process kind of pieces? Or are they about movement? And when you install them in different places, is there a kind of notation that goes along with them, or is it different each time?
It's different each time. I would say I'm definitely into the pedestrian choreography of that, and the notation is the way in which, in that specific situation, what that the architecture of that, what's surrounding that, what's also might end up being in a possible dialogue with the foldogram. So those are all things that I'm thinking about once I get into the space. It's very live that way. I was thinking of something else when you said that, but maybe it'll come to me.
Well, it strikes me that they're certainly relational, and whether that's in
Absolutely.
a solo show and the site responsiveness that you're describing, or in a sense of the potential dialogues with other works, other aspects of the space that are there.
The other thing I should say is, like, the first foldogram, the big one that's actually right now at participant, the fact that it's not fixed, it keeps changing on the emulsion side. And what we've noticed is that the lights in the gallery have changed the color of the photo paper. It's where it was blue, there's like now these green streaks. So it will keep changing, not only in its form, but in the color of it, so in a way it's kind of live. So there's a kind of choreography in that too.
Well, in between shows, do you roll them up?
Exactly. It's very economical that, like there's an ecology, right, in them, because they can become so many different things. But yeah, I do. I roll them up, and it's very easy to transport. And I also really like that people have said to me, oh, it looks very heavy, like it's metal. And in fact, it's really light. So I can make these very large sculptures. But in fact, I can also physically, manipulate them myself.
One of the things I noticed from the slides that Joy assembled for this presentation was that there are certain strategies or forms also that they've just deployed with different foldtograms in different circumstances, and that they aren't repeated in a single one necessarily in multiple iterations, but they're a certain way of folding something in on itself or a particular type of relationship to the wall that you've used in different circumstances and with different works. So it does seem like there is a sort of grammar.
I think I'm probably building like another kind of archive, how I use the film material. That becomes another kind of archive because I start to understand what the paper is capable of, the kind of choreography that might be possible if you twist and roll something or tie it in a knot or whatever, or lean it against itself, like all those things, like the accidental things that happen, the damage that I'm doing to it becomes a positive. All those things help me increase the archive and the knowledge about how this material can be manipulated. Yeah.
And do you have a photographic archive of all these installations? That's
I
part of-
do. I have, a lot of photographs of them. I have I have an enormous amount of photographs in general, but yes.
We could have a whole talk, I think, on the archival dimensions to your practice, which I think with the
Probably.
film also seems really significant as well, and thinking about how you've sort of tracked all of this different footage and whatnot. We have one more question back here, and then I want to make sure that we have.
Thank you. So you mentioned that you see film as a sculpture, and I wanted to hear more on that, and if you can talk a little bit more on the tactile dimension of film and how does it translate to other mediums that you're using, like photography. Thank you.
I think in a couple of ways. First off, in the editing, what I've learned in terms of like cutting a section of footage apart and really studying that, and then how I put it back together and how I move things around and how things can overlap and the direction of things. So I feel like in the film, there's a sense of it opening up and leading you in and then folding back on itself and coming in another direction, and all those things to me read as sculpture. And I'm thinking about how I'm thinking about a number of sculptors actually, when like one being like Phillida Barlow, who is using like a lot of detritus, cardboard, things found in her environment, and then making those things into some kind of object. And I feel like the film is a kind of collection of those things too, that once they're in conversation with each other or having a dialogue or a interaction, that then produces another kind of space. And it's that space that to me reads as sculpture. And I feel like the more I've worked with the foldograms and moved the flat single dimension two-dimensional paper into the object, it is the object. I see that filmically too. That's kind of how I'm trying to use the footage that I gather. That
Time for one more question.
Last question.
Hi, thank you both so much. I have two questions, but they're both small. I was just curious what drew you to burning the paper to make the foldograms,
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I was curious about the act of burning the paper for the foldograms was the first question I had. And then my other question regarding the films was your choice to narrate them and how you narrate them and like your voice and the tempo and just your choice of doing that. Thank you very much.
So yeah, I use a torch. It's very satisfying. And I try and do it outside because it's very stinky. Probably really bad for you, so I do wear a mask. I found that heating it, whether it be like the RC paper and how it cracks the emulsion, I've used an iron, I've used all kinds of things, matches, whatever. It's another technique in a way for me now. It's another way of manipulating the paper. With the Fujiflex, which is what the chromogenic paper is in this one, the heat makes it pucker and also allows for, if you saw the piece, you'd see that in certain areas then it becomes thinner and almost see-through, and that makes almost like another dimension. And then it also has a way that it's made the integrity of the way in which it can lean on itself and the torque of that, it almost gives it a substructure. So I found all these ways of working to make it possible to create the thing I'm trying to get to. So I think that's what the heating has allowed. I've learned a lot from it, and it also can change the color. That's the other thing, even in the black and white one, the black and white silver gelatin paper, because I'm not using the processes of the darkroom in the correct order. Everything is not necessarily in the right order. I'm going against those protocols, but they'll produce colors. So that one really big one that you saw, there's amazing yellows and pinks and ochres and blacks and browns, but it's black and white silver gelatin paper. So I've managed something there. And then the other thing that you asked me was
Narration?
narrative. So I've been thinking about, well, in the first one, in the market film came before, obviously, the one you saw tonight. And so I kept thinking about what happened with the psychoanalysts in their apartment, even while I was shooting the video. And then I realized that it was all part of the same piece. And so I started to think about, I started to write what happened between me and the psychoanalysts. But the other thing that it allowed me was, even though here you were seeing the market in black and white, I could talk about the colors of the objects in the apartment. So that's where color is introduced. So it's kind of, you as the viewer then are being asked in a way to hold a couple of things at the same time and make that manifest for yourself. And I think I do that again in the As Long as There's You, As Long as There's Me. I tried for very spare narratives. I try and keep my voice very calm, that there's not too much inflection, because I know when I'm talking to you right now, I use my hands a lot. And and I keep wanting to drop that thing. Anyway, that spare narrative is also a way to get you, the viewer, involved. So, like the whole opening of the film is this very grainy, what am I looking at, bringing you down this road, and then, this spare narrative to kind of get you interested. And again, it's that thing of you're seeing one thing and hearing another, and they don't necessarily go together, but somehow they do. And I'm trying to bring you along on this journey. And so I tried to keep the narrative as simple as possible, and that there's not too much of it. So it's a balance. And a lot of that has to do with trying to leave an open space for the viewer to have their own way through, even whether it be the film or whether it be the foldograms.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Joy Episalla.